Yeah. Thank you, Tom. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Newton Pritchett. Craig did a great job of driving down. I just want you to know because I need a ride back. So I'm very grateful for what a fine job he did getting us here. I am a member of the morning meditation group in Cary, North Carolina. It's the second best meeting in the world, and hopefully you think your home group is the best. But if not, come see us. We meet 6:30 every morning for an open 11th step prayer and meditation and discussion meeting, whether we need it or not. And it has revolutionized my sobriety. It has rocketed my sobriety into fourth dimension, or something. Well, I think those are the flowery terms Bill Wilson used for it, but it truly has made a great difference to me. My sobriety date is April 10th, 1981, and usually when I do this, the general instructions are to tell you in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now. And I always think of the what happened as sobering up. And that's probably what they mean, because back when the big book was written, they weren't on a step a year plan, like sort of the plan that I was on when I got here. And so the date when I sobered up and the date when I had a spiritual awakening are some 11 years apart. So tonight I'm going to just try and go with that. The what happened is the spiritual awakening part. And that was on June 22nd of 1992. And so I'm 21 years old. That's the way I figure it now. So, and I'm going to tell you a little bit, I hope, about how that came about, because the big book also says that our stories, in our stories, the person tells in their own words and in their own experience how they established a relationship with God of their understanding. And that, to me, has become the greatest fact of my life. And I was definitely not a good candidate for having a spiritual awakening, but I became convinced that that was the only way that I was going to survive. And it was a tough choice between dying in my own vomit and putting my life on a spiritual basis. But thank goodness the latter won out. So this is really nerve-wracking. I thank you, Tom, for asking me to come down. This is the second or third time I've spoken at this group, and this is like preaching to the choir a little bit. So it's intimidating to me. But and this is probably my least favorite thing to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. I get the pleasure of devoting almost all of my time to AA nowadays, and this is definitely my least favorite thing to do. But it's kind of like the best analogy I've ever heard, I think, is being elected most handsome man on the cell block. It's a nice honor to be invited, but I'm not sure I want to pick up the award. So, but here I am. So, I was born and raised in Raleigh. I'm a junior. Senior had an MD after his name, and it was always expected that I was going to follow in his footsteps. My father we did not have a close relationship. He was a very intimidating person to me. He wanted the best for his kids. I was the third of three, and I felt like I could never measure up. He told me early on that I was going to do everything that he hadn't been able to accomplish, and I really couldn't figure out what that was, because it seemed like he accomplished everything that he set out to do. And And it was very intimidating to me. I felt inferior from an early age. And I felt like I didn't measure up. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't athletic enough. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't fill in the blank enough. And I set about trying to fool you into thinking that I was enough. But I was always afraid that you were going to discover the real me, which was, I had a picture when I was 8 years old taken when I won the Pee Wee division. We were talking about golf since we were in Southern Pines. I won the Pee Wee division of our club championship. It was the 8 and under, and I was the oldest guy there. And I was about this tall, and I had these big, thick glasses. And I looked like the kid in The Christmas Story, if you've ever seen that movie. And I felt about like it too. But there was a picture, and the few times I invited a girl over to my parents' house, out would come the scrapbook, and they'd have to show, my sisters dressed me up in their dresses, and and then show me with I was a little kid with his trophy that was about twice as big as I was, and it was just humiliating. But they seemed to really enjoy it. So anyway, that's the way I grew up. I grew up not everything that I needed, most anything that I wanted, I got. And that was how my parents expressed love. I understand that. It didn't sink in to me. With all the stuff that I was given, it always came to me. I felt that I was being given it because I wasn't good enough to get it on my own. I was an egomaniac with an inferiority complex for as long as I can remember. And that was true growing up. I did well in school, but it was mostly because I wanted the applause. I wanted the appreciation or the love from my parents for getting good grades, and I was pretty much of a goody two shoes kind of, at least on the surface. I was. There is a skit that they do, or they used to do, in treatment of a dysfunctional family, and they have roles where the kids take on, and one is the rebel, that was my oldest sister, one was the hero, that was my middle sister, one is the ghost, and that was me. And I got away with a lot, but I got away with it all. I did it all secretly, and I did it all while all the focus was on my oldest sister and all the crying and the shouting and all that. And I could run around and pretty much do anything that I wanted, as long as I got away with it. And I got away with it and well into college. But that was how I grew up. That's how I was. And I didn't drink. I occasionally had a drink. My father, I hardly ever saw my father drink. When he drank, sometimes he'd have one drink after a round of golf and he was okay. But if he drank a second one, everybody stayed away from him. He wasn't a drunk, but his personality changed when he had a couple of drinks. And he eventually just stopped. He had that kind of character. He stopped smoking when the Surgeon General's report came out, and he stopped drinking, and he just stopped. He just thought everybody ought to be able to do that. So he could. But I occasionally would sneak a sip of one of his drinks or something, but I didn't ever drink enough to have an effect until I got to college. I went away to prep school. That was the first of my geographical cures. That was his idea. maybe if I went away, maybe I would be more comfortable. I would be happier. I mean, I was already a depressed kind of kid. And so I went to a very good school, and I did very well. And I was too scared to ever do all the stuff that some of the guys were getting away with. So it was not till I went to college, and my freshman year, in the fall, we had a football game, and where I went to school, anybody would become an alcoholic if you went to our football games, because that was the only thing that made them tolerable. But we had a keg party after one of them, and I finally figured out what caused my alcoholism, and it was I can narrow it down to one word, and it was Jeannie. Jeannie was this beautiful blonde junior who was the girlfriend of the resident advisor on our freshman dorm, and half the freshman dorm dreamt of Jeannie, but she was untouchable. She was a goddess, and you stayed away from her. And one of my friends challenged me to a chugging contest at this keg party, and little did I know it, he didn't drink it. He threw it over his shoulder, but I turned my head up and drank it, and he said, well, okay, you won, I'll challenge you to go another one. And he did the same thing, and I did the same thing. And what happened next makes me an alcoholic. I thought it happened to everybody who drank. It turns out it only happens to about 10% of the people who drink, and that is, my whole world changed. I had a pseudo-spiritual experience on 2 beers. And again, the best analogy I've ever come up with is way back when I was a kid, we got a color TV. And the only color program that was on at the time was Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. And the opening of it, there was this fairy, Tinkerbell or somebody, I don't know. It would start out in black and white, and Tinkerbell would go zing! And it was color. And it was, whoa, awesome, this is incredible. I'm sorry. That's going to make a bad mark on the tape. Anyway, and that's what happened when I drank. I drank a couple of beers, and I had that. I felt it down to my fingertips. I mean, it was like nirvana. It was, and I could dance. I danced with Jeannie that night. I told jokes to her. I had a great time. She was darn lucky to get to spend a little time with me that night. And her boyfriend didn't punch me out. He didn't report me to the dean. I mean, I didn't get in any trouble for it. It was all good, no bad. I came to the conclusion very quickly that I had been born with an alcohol deficiency. That football in my gut deflated, and I had never found anything that would do that for me. And I went about chasing that for the next 8.5 years. That same feeling. I don't think I ever caught it that same way again, but it wasn't from lack of trying. And pretty quickly, some of the consequences started occurring. I was a blackout drinker. I would routinely lose my car. I got so I would write a note to myself as to where my car was parked, and then I couldn't remember where the note was. And I wound up in strange places, and I mistook the closet for the bathroom more than once, and I had rules that I laid down because I knew if you passed out, then you had a drinking problem, so it didn't count as passing out if I, got my contacts out. I had to make pretty easy rules to pass, but they were rules nonetheless. It didn't count as a morning drink if you stayed up all night drinking, because that was just a continuation of the night before, and all those things that social drinkers don't do. I didn't realize that until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember my next incident with Jeannie was about 2 or 3 months later. It was her boyfriend's birthday, and she had gone to all this trouble and baked this elaborate cake, and some of the guys in the dorm were there to celebrate with him, and we took him over to Chapel Hill and had a few beers, and we came back, and I remember I had gotten my first bottle. Now we couldn't, you had to be 21 at that time to get booze, so I had to get wine. So I remember my first bottle that I got was A&P peach wine, and it cost 79 cents for a big thing like that. And it certainly never saw a grape, much less a cork or anything else, but it was awful stuff. And on top of the beer, I drank that, and the last thing I remember was intentionally taking my hand and knocking the cake up and all over the place. And Jeannie wasn't quite as thrilled to be in my company at that point, and neither was her boyfriend. So, and I remember the night I missed 2 days of classes after that. I had terrible hangovers. I have a weak stomach. We were talking about cruising. They were talking about cruising on the way down here. I don't go on a cruise because I have a notoriously weak stomach, and I did a lot of worshiping at that porcelain altar for the next few years. And if I could just figure out how to do it so I didn't end up with the dry heaves, then that was success. And I just always had 2 drinks too many. Wasn't you all, when I got here, you all talked about it as the first drink. I thought you must have been a bunch of panty waste. It was the next to the last drink that got me, and it was always there. And it was just I had a knack for getting drunk at the worst possible times. I had a knack for when I really needed to keep my head on straight and do some work for school, or I was supposed to be on the golf team, and I quit the golf team because the coach expected us to practice. Got in the way of my drinking, and supposed to be in pre-med, but that meant you had to go to these labs in the afternoon, and that got in the way of my drinking, so I dropped out of that. And so I gave up these things that had really been an important part of my life without even really thinking about it, without weighing it. Should I go to the bar on Thursday afternoon, or should I go to lab? It was like I didn't have any choice in the matter. They couldn't have the party without me on Thursday afternoon, so it was my duty to go. So my grades went from a 3.5 to a 2.7 first semester to second semester, and I got out of pre-med and went into a course of study to lead me to become a lawyer. And I never wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't like lawyers. I didn't want to be a lawyer. It just didn't appeal to me at all. But I did it because I could do that and stay in school. I wouldn't have to get out and get a job, and I didn't know how I could survive out there in the real world. I just had no confidence in my ability whatsoever. So I just fell into really pre-law, and I had an interest in government, so I had gone up to Washington for several summers. And if you're a potential alcoholic and you want to become the real thing, Washington is a great place to go. I could go to parties every night of the week, and I never had to pay for drinks. One night I told them I was on the House Education and Labor staff, committee staff. The next night I was on Senator Kennedy's staff. The next night I was on Senator Helm's staff. Whoever was providing the booze, that's where I went. And they didn't care. They never checked. And so we just went around from party to party to party, drinking for free. And that's how I spent my summers. Somehow graduated, got into law school, did a little. I did a little better living through chemistry during that time, and it wasn't because I really liked the effect that I got from those other things. It was because I was trying to get the effect of alcohol without paying the consequences, paying the nausea, the hangovers, all that stuff. And I could never find the right thing. Everything I did just made me one with the couch, and that was the opposite of what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the life of the party, and that's what alcohol, I thought, did for me. So I quickly gave those other things up, and but I never gave up alcohol. I never even, before I got to AA, I never tried to stop. I would make those resolutions, gazing into the shimmering waters of the porcelain altar in the morning. Oh God, I'll never do that again. And but it was never a decision. So that was the way things went. And I got into law school, and my drinking continued, and then it became difficult to go to class because they had this sadistic method of teaching law where the professor would get up behind the podium like this, and he would call on you and ask you a question, and he would keep asking you questions until you missed it, and then the whole room would laugh at you, and then they'd go on to the next person. They call it the Socratic method, but it's sadism. And it was just an awful lot easier not to go to class than to sit through that. So often as not, I wouldn't go to class, and then I'd feel guilty about it, and then I'd have to have a little drinky poo or so to get over the guilt and the shame that I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, and then I'd need to watch the news shows on TV for when they came and knocked on my door to ask me to run for United States Senate. I wanted to be up to date on what was going on in the world. And so I'd sit there and watch, and then in the afternoons, it wasn't Oprah or Ellen on, it was Jim and Tammy Faye. And I'd sit there in my drunk chair and feel sorry for people who bought into that. And that's what I thought of anything that had to do with God, that it was just for the weak and the ill-informed and the superstitious. And pour me another drink. I rocked along through law school like that. Finally, getting incompletes. I really wanted a car, a sports car. My sister had this particular type of sports car that I envied, and so I talked my parents into buying me a sports car for graduation. I neglected to tell them I wasn't graduating just yet. The minor detail, so I got a car, and another month or so later, they find out from friends of theirs who were parents of a guy I was in school with that Newton really wasn't graduating, and there were some unpleasant times in the Pritchett household for a few days about that. But I had my car, and I went back up to Washington, and then I came back down. There was after the end of the summer, the congressman had hired a new person in his office. This was in the fall of 1980. And I fell in love at first sight. I went into the office to keep from going to class, and his office was in the Research Triangle, so it was on the way over to Chapel Hill for me. So I just stopped off there and fell head over heels in love. Got that same feeling of electricity down to my fingers and toes the moment I saw her that I had felt the first time I drank. Now, I realized a long time later that qualifies me for Al-Anon because she happened to be an alcoholic. She had 6 weeks of sobriety, 6 glorious weeks of sobriety when I met her. And we started dating, and her birthday was in September of that year, mid-September, and I had been hospitalized for the 3rd time in less than a year with some sort of unknown blood/liver disorder that they couldn't figure out what it was. But it probably had something to do with how much I was drinking. But if they ever asked, I didn't tell them the truth. But anyway, I got out, got this on the day of her birthday, went to a very expensive wine shop in North Raleigh, spent lots of my parents' money buying her a bottle of wine, a Magnum. It's like this tall French champagne. And took it over to her and gave it to her. And she said, "That's so sweet of you. I can't believe what you get out of the hospital, you do this, you go get that and bring this all the way over here to me. But I can't drink it because I'm an alcoholic and I go to AA." And I said, "Really? Well, I don't want you to be tempted, so I'll drink it for you, and then you won't have to worry with it." So I did. I drank an entire Magnum of French champagne, and she, I think, got the idea that she had her first 12-step opportunity, passed out on her sofa that evening. And things rocked along for a while. Finally, I pestered her long enough where she was going every night to take me to an AA meeting. And back then, the only open meetings in Raleigh were speaker meetings. And so we went to, my first AA meeting was the night after Thanksgiving at the Hayes Barton Group in Raleigh in 1980. And they say if you go to enough meetings, you'll hear somebody get up behind one of these podiums and tell your story. And I'm sure that's true. For me, it happened to me the very first meeting I ever went to, and I was not even there because I was an alcoholic. I was there because I wanted to know who she was spending all her time with every night. But I heard a guy tell my story. It's still one of the closest, as far as what happened, stories to mine that I've ever heard. But somewhere along, about 10 minutes left in his talk, something happened to him that had not happened to me yet, and I breathed a sigh of relief and realized that I was not an alcoholic and that I should go to Al-Anon. So I started going to Al-Anon, and I didn't fit in because Al-Anon is a wonderful program. It later saved my life. It is for people who have been affected by another person's drinking that they are close to, and the only person who drinking I had been affected by was my own. So I really did not need to be in Al-Anon at the time. But I was going to open AA meetings with her, see who she was, sitting with and all that. And hearing all these stories, and I didn't graduate at the end of that, didn't graduate at the end of that year. Man, a lot of bad things happened. It got worser and worser, and there's no such word as worser unless you're an alcoholic. And if you're an alcoholic, you know what I'm talking about. My mother, who was my enabler, my last enabler, basically said, "I can't watch this anymore." And my father chimed right in with, "You're killing your mother, and don't you have any self-respect," and all that. And about a month later, Victoria, who was the young lady I had met, basically said the same thing. "I can't watch you kill yourself like this anymore," and we're through. And then I was alone. Then I knew loneliness as few people do, and I hatched a plan to kill myself. I was going to take that sports car and ram it into a bridge abutment on the way over to Chapel Hill. On the old Pray For Me Highway 54 is what we call it. That's what we call it. And that would end it. And they'd all be sorry. They'd all be sorry that they didn't love me more. And, I never really thought it through that it wouldn't do me any good, but they'd all be, crying on the coffin and all that. I thought that through a lot, but I never never got to the point of I'd be in the ground after that. But anyway, I didn't carry it through because I was sitting in an AA meeting on April 10th. Well, I'll back up one day. April 9th, Victoria picked up a 9-month chip, and I was at the AA meeting. And afterwards, after that meeting, she came up to me and said, why don't you just pick up a white chip? Why don't you just get up and join AA and try these 12 steps, and maybe it would help you. And I was offended. I took offense on behalf of you who really needed this program, because I was not an alcoholic. I had a lot of problems. I was suicidal, depressed. I thought I had split personalities. I thought I had lots of things, but alcoholism wasn't one. And I would have bet my life that night that I was not an alcoholic. But somehow those words just rattled around in my brain for the next 24 hours, and I went to another open speaker meeting the next night, which was April 10th of 81, and sitting in an AA meeting, I had a moment of clarity, which saved my life. To me, it was an act of God that I wasn't aware of, wouldn't have believed in if you'd told me that at the time. But it was to the effect that if the only way I could stand the pain that I was in, emotional pain that I was in, was to get drunk and hopefully screw up the courage to carry out my plan to kill myself, maybe, possibly, somehow, alcohol had some kind of power in me, over me. And that was about as far as I could get. But that was enough for me to get up and pick up a white chip. And I picked up a white chip, and I was immediately surrounded by the men of Alcoholics Anonymous, who told me I never had to be alone again. And if you had offered me $1 million at that time, couldn't possibly have come close to how good it felt to be told I never had to be alone again. Because I honestly felt like they were ready to beam me up to the mothership at that point. I mean, I just thought I was completely different from any other person walking this planet. And the next night I went to my first closed meeting. There was a guy who was chairing. He talked really funny. He talked like this because he was from Minnesota. And after the meeting, I was shaking and sweating. And after the meeting, I asked him to be my sponsor. I'd heard about this sponsor thing, all these talks I've been listening to. And I needed help. I knew I was coming apart at the seams. And he said, sure. See those ashtrays right there? Go back and wash them. And I thought, this is how you get the grunt work done in AA. You get the new guy to ask for help, and you get the worst job to do. Well, it turned out it was a great job to me. It was the only job I could have done, for one thing, and for another, I couldn't even do that because some of them had bean bags on the bottom of them, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to wash them without getting the beans wet, and I had to ask. I had to be stupid and ask. And the guy said, well, you just put the rag under the water and then you wipe out the ashtray. You guys are brilliant. And that's how it's been ever since. Tim, we had nothing in common. He rooted for the wrong sports teams. He voted for the wrong party. The things that were really important to me. But God bless him, he listened. He took me to lunch. We went to lunch at least once a week, often twice a week. If he was working, so he had to fit it into his schedule. I was doing nothing, so I was available. He called it wining and dining. He dined and I wined, and I really needed that time of whining to get it out, to make connection with another human being. After that point, I had not had that in my life. And I made a good start on the steps. As I told you, the second step was I indicated to you, it was difficult to me because I really was completely closed-minded and prejudiced. And he convinced me that I just had to come to believe in the God of my understanding, or higher power of my understanding. It could be my own conception of God. And that still took a while. And he changed those ABC pertinent ideas at the end of that part of how it works that we usually read into questions, and asked me if I was convinced. And when I could say yes to all three, then he told me I was at step 3, and I didn't know that came out of the big book. I thought it was just on a piece of plastic. I didn't know there was another sentence there that said being convinced we were at step 3, so he tricked me into that. But we did step 3, and long about that time he had to move to Pennsylvania. Well, he said he had to move. I knew he was just getting away from me, but he had lined it up so his job transferred to in Pennsylvania. I got another sponsor, and I started in on a 4th step. And I spent 2 months writing out 3 legal pads full of explanations. I had a lot of explaining to do in my first 4th step. I couldn't make heads or tails of that example they had in the big book. I didn't know Mr. Brown. I wasn't employed. I didn't have a wife. None of that applied to me. But I could answer those questions that Bill wrote out in the 12 and 12, and that's what I set about doing. And I wrote a lot. Finally, my new sponsor, had to tell me, we got to do a 5th step. So I did a 5th step, all except a couple of things I was going to the grave with. They were buried somewhere down in that 3rd legal pad, and they weren't ever seeing the light of day. Everett, my new sponsor, did a terrific 5th step. He told me things that curled my hair. If I'd have known those things before I picked him as a sponsor, I'd have never picked him as a sponsor. I came away from that 5th step thinking, I got a really sick sponsor here. And I didn't get the benefit of doing a 5th step. Took a lot of promises in the big book about spiritual awakenings and beginning in the 5th step, and I didn't feel them. I got 6 and 7 I spent very little time on. There were only 2 or 3 paragraphs in the book. 8 and 9 I did the amends that were fairly easy and immediate in front of me. 10 and 11, really, I just continued doing what I was doing. And 12, it was, I'm sick, let me share it with you. And that was the Newton Pritchett program of recovery for the next 10 years. Meanwhile, against sponsors' advice, Victoria and I got married. I somehow got out of law school. I somehow took the bar exam. I somehow passed it. I somehow got a job in the legal world. We had 2 kids. I think I know how that occurred, but we had 2 kids. And neither one of us were going to meetings anymore. We had never handed in our written resignations to AA. We just stopped going, gradually stopped going. And we were in a codependent mess. And I bottomed out. And we both bottomed out, actually. She just happened to pick up the drink that had my name on it. At 10 years of not drinking and not recovering, she thought maybe one drink wouldn't hurt. And it started a spiral for the next 20 years that wound up killing her. But it got me into family night at the treatment center that she wound up in on her first DUI. And her counselor happened to be somebody who I'd known back when I was going to meetings, and she asked me how I was doing, and I said, "Oh, I'm just doing great, except I got to take care of these 2 kids. I got a job. I got a house to take care of, and my wife was out here playing volleyball 28 days, and she drank. And other than that, I'm doing just fine." And she said, the counselor said, "I think you need to go to a meeting." So they get paid a lot of money for that, sage advice. She was right, thank goodness. I told her why I couldn't go, and she said, "I don't care. I'm going to write down in this book here that you're going to go to an AA meeting." And I happened to find a meeting that met half a block away from where I worked. It met once a week at that time. And I crawled back to Alcoholics Anonymous, not having taken a drink and being just as suicidal and just as crazy as the day that I first walked in. And through a long series of events, I got hooked up with another sponsor who took me back through the steps. I heard him share in a meeting that he hadn't done very much on step 6 and 7, and I knew I hadn't done much on 6 and 7, and that those were the character building steps. And I wanted what he had. And so I asked him to be my sponsor, and we went back through the steps. I did a 4th step the way it was described in the book, and I saw my pattern of behavior, and I saw my thinking. I saw how I always tried to get my way. What I wrote in the 4th column, which was my part in it, made a lie out of what it was in the 2nd column. And what those people did, they weren't doing it to me. They didn't wake up that morning to get me, and I thought they did. And God didn't get me. God wasn't up there throwing lightning bolts at me, and nobody was out to get me. I just made that misery trying to get my way. 5th step, I got all that out, including the things I was going to the grave with. 6 and 7, my sponsor told me to spend a year on 6 and 7. It seemed a little extreme to me, but I took his advice. I spent a lot of time on it. Meanwhile, Victoria had gone back to her 2nd treatment center and gotten in every time she went to a treatment center, she came out sober and with a boyfriend. And the one that she came out with in this treatment center happened to be the head counselor. And it was a big blow up. And I had gone through this 4th step and 5th step and decided that I wanted to be a loving, caring husband. I was on the way out to St. Louis for a hearing, June 22nd, 1992, and I went into the home office to get the stuff that I needed to take with me, and there I found correspondence between my wife and her boyfriend, which indicated that she did not share the same long-term goals of being married, and I hit a bottom. I hit an emotional bottom that I hope I never have to hit again unless I need it. I had to get on a plane. I was crying hysterically. If it had been after 9/11, I'm sure they wouldn't have let me on the plane. They'd have thought this guy's, got a bomb in his shoe or something. But at that time, I just walked on a plane, and my thoughts were, this is what happens when you try and put your life on a spiritual basis. You try and be a loving, tolerant person, and nice guys finish last. You get kicked. And I experienced, at 30,000 feet on the halfway to St. Louis, I experienced the God of my understanding. I got a glimpse of God's ultimate reality. And that was that, for me, that I was my soul, the part that was really me, the one that was the 8-year-old kid with the glasses in the picture, was loved and cared for and protected by that God, and that my job for the rest of the time I was here was to be the best channel of that feeling that I had experienced to his other kids. And for the last 21 years, to varying degrees, that's what I've tried to do on a daily basis. Our 11th step meeting reminds me every day that I'm not running the show, and I just had to stay in conscious contact with that loving God that I have experienced, and let God out. I had God walled in. It wasn't that I couldn't find God out there somewhere. I believe that God was always within, or at least the idea of God, and I had it walled in with selfishness and self-centeredness of different kinds, and scratching and clawing and trying to get my way and all that, and so I couldn't let God out. When I'm dominated by that kind of egomania and fear, I'm on my own, and I don't have the power to be on my own. I know that. So that has become what life has been. Whether I'm now retired from, I worked in the legal field for 30 years and retired, and I now get to spend lots of my time looking for ways to to be that channel to his other kids, to be an ACOG, an adult child of God. And I'm blessed with, I've had service opportunities. I've been able to serve fairly low down on the service triangle, and meet people like Tom who are my heroes. I just try and walk not too far behind them. And I've gotten the last couple of years, I've gotten involved with some wild and crazy young people who are charged up about about practicing the three legacies of recovery, unity, and service. And it just, I feel that same feeling that I felt when I first drink. The electricity goes through right out my hands and my feet when I'm around them. And so I've come to understand come to believe that everybody has a gift to bring to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I'm not here, I don't get to deliver my gift to you. And if you're not here, I don't get to receive your gift to me. And I did go to enough law school classes to know that for a gift to be complete, it has to be given and it has to be received. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and offer my gift, and I hope somebody received something good out of it. Thank you very much.